So we're in the fifth video, which is the Heart Anatomy and Physiology Study Guide. So as usual in this website that I've created, we have the reviewer, multiple choice quiz, and essay questions. So let's start the review. So anatomy of the heart. So location and size. The heart is roughly the size of a fist, your fist, of course. It is located superior to the diaphragm, so it's above, superior to the diaphragm, to the left of the midline, anterior to the vertebral column, and posterior to the sternum. So it's right here. So that's where the location is and the size. Next is the pericardium. So the heart is enclosed in a double-walled sac called the pericardium. So it's a double-walled sac. Next is the fibrous pericardium. This is the superficial layer. And next is the serous pericardium, which is the deep two-layer membrane. Next is parietal layer. These are lines. These lines the inside of the fibrous pericardium. So it's the parietal layer. Next is the visceral layer, which is the epicardium. So epicardium, myocardium, and endocardium. So visceral layers, the epicardium, which lines the surface of the heart. Next is pericardial cavity. Now this is the space between the parietal and visceral layers, filled with fluid. And of course, it's the pericardial fluid. So the functions, the pericardium protects the heart, anchors it, and prevents overfilling. And of course, it provides a friction-free environment because of the fluid. So if you've heard of the term friction rub, so there's a problem with the pericardial cavity. And then next is the wall of the heart, consists of 3 layers. The epicardium, which we've said earlier, which is the outermost layer. Myocardium, the middle muscular layer composed of cardiac muscle. Next is the endocardium, which is the inner layer that lines the heart chambers. That's the endocardium. So the heart has 4 chambers, which is the atria, or the receiving chambers. This is the right atrium, which receives deoxygenated blood, and the left atrium, which receives oxygenated blood. And we have the ventricles, or the discharging chambers. So the right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs, and the left ventricle pumps blood to the rest of the body. And let's talk about valves. So 4 valves ensure a one-way blood flow. And if there is regurgitation or stenosis of the valve, now we have a valve pathology problem. And it needs to be fixed or repaired or replaced. So next is the atrioventricular valves. So it's the tricuspid on the right side of the heart, and the bicuspid or mitral valve, which is found on the left. And semilunar valves, which is the pulmonary and aortic valve. So the pulmonary valve, when the blood passes the pulmonary valve, it goes to the pulmonary trunk. And for the aortic valve, it goes to the aorta. So next is the physiology of the heart. So deoxygenated blood enters the right atrium from the 2 cavas, so from the inferior and superior vena cava. And it flows through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle. And then the right ventricle pumps it through the pulmonary valve going to the lungs for it to be oxygenated. And now oxygenated blood returns from the lungs to the left atrium, and it will enter through the through the pulmonary veins. So the next one is it flows through the mitral valve to the left ventricle, and the left ventricle pumps it to the aortic valve through the aortic valve to the rest of the body. And next is the cardiac conduction system. So the heart's electrical system includes the SA node, which is the pacemaker of the heart. Next is the AV node. Next is the bundle of His, which has the bundle branches and the Purkinje fibers. And comment down below if you want more information or a new video detailing the cardiac conduction system, and we can certainly dive through it. Next is electrocardiogram or ECG, or in other resources it's EKG. So this is just the depolarization and repolarization. So P wave is the atrial depolarization. QRS complex is the ventricular depolarization. And T wave is the ventricular repolarization, or going back to its resting state. Next is the cardiac output. So the amount of blood pumped by each ventricle in 1 minute. So the amount of blood pumped by each ventricle in 1 minute. So there's a formula, which is cardiac output is equal to heart rate times stroke volume. And next one, no, that's for the renal. So I encourage you all to answer the multiple choice quiz to just test your understanding and test your knowledge about the cardiac side of the lecture. And let's go through some essay questions. We have 5. So trace the complete pathway of blood through the pulmonary and systemic circuits, starting from its return to the right atrium. Name each chamber, valve, and major vessel in the correct sequence. So the model answer is, so the pathway of blood through the heart and lungs follows a precise sequence to ensure the separation of deoxygenated and oxygenated blood. The entire process begins as deoxygenated blood returns from the body to the heart. The pathway through the pulmonary circuit is as follows. So blood enters the right atrium, as we've discussed earlier, to the from the superior and inferior vena cava. From the right atrium, blood passes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. So it's going down first. And then from the right ventricle, it will pump, which will then it pumps the deoxygenated blood through the pulmonary semilunar valve into the pulmonary arteries, which lead to the lungs for it to be oxygenated. So in the capillary beds of the lungs, gas exchange occurs. And following oxygenation in the lungs, the systemic circuit begins. So oxygenated blood returns from the lungs to the left atrium via the pulmonary veins. The left atrium pumps the blood through the bicuspid or mitral valve into the left ventricle. And then the left ventricle, which has the much thicker myocardium than the right, pumps the oxygen-rich blood through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta. And it gets pumped all over the body. And one really cool fact about the heart is that it gets its blood supply during ventricular relaxation. So when it pumps the blood, the valves open, blood comes out, and when it relaxes, it shuts down, and when the blood comes back, it will go inside the right and left coronary arteries. So next, from the aorta, the blood is distributed throughout the systemic circulation to all body tissues. So that's the complete pathway of blood through the pulmonary and systemic circuits. Next is describe the anatomical layers of the heart, starting from the outermost covering to the innermost lining. And for each layer, briefly state its function, then explain the conditions of pericarditis and endocarditis as described in the presentation, which we had already done in school. So the heart is enclosed and protected by several distinct layers, each with a specific structure and function. The outermost covering is the pericardium, which is a double-walled sac. It consists of a superficial fibrous pericardium and a deep two-layer serous pericardium. The serous pericardium's parietal layer lines the internal surface of the fibrous pericardium, while its visceral layer, also known as the epicardium, lines the surface of the heart. And between these two layers is the fluid-filled pericardial cavity. It is filled with pericardial fluid. The pericardium serves to protect and anchor the heart, prevent it from overfilling with blood, and allow it to work in a relatively friction-free environment. And the heart wall itself is composed of three layers. The epicardium, which is the visceral layer of the serous pericardium, which we've discussed here. Next is the myocardium. This is the cardiac muscle that forms the bulk of the heart. It is responsible for the heart's pumping action. And if, by the way, if you want a more detailed explanation on the myocardium and how it pumps and the action potential involved, including the exchange of ions, just comment down below if you want a similar video to this detailing that, and we will endeavor to make one. And the last one is the endocardium, and this is the endothelial layer that lines the inner myocardial surface and the heart chambers. So I had the privilege to touch this endocardium because I was in cardiac surgery before. So when we take out the heart and we do a heart transplant, so this is when I get to do it. So next is the inflammation of these layers. So inflammation of these layers can lead into serious conditions. So first one is pericarditis, which is the inflammation of the pericardium. So peri and then card and then itis. If you see itis, for those who doesn't know yet, or for those who are interested to pursue a career in surgery or in medicine, so pericarditis is itis is for infection. So with potential causes including trauma and infection. So endocarditis is an infection and inflammation of the heart's inner lining. So pericarditis is from the pericardium, and then endocarditis is the inner lining in the endocardium. And it is most common in individuals with damaged or artificial heart valves and is caused by bacteria entering the bloodstream and settling on these valves. Because those valves that are used for replacement, they are not immune to infection. So we still have three. So explain the sequence of electrical excitation through the heart's conduction system from impulse generation to ventricular contraction, and correlate the key events in the sequence with the P wave, QRS complex, and T waves in the ECG. Define cardiac output and its components, heart rate, and stroke volume, and explain how stroke volume is calculated and detail the three primary factors that affect it. And the last one is compare and contrast the function of the atrioventricular valves and the semilunar valves during the cardiac cycle. Describe the specific mechanisms that cause each type of valve to open and close. So I will leave this to you, and to review, just go to the website, which I will link down in the description. And if you found it useful, please like and subscribe and leave a comment on, or if you want any surgical topics discussed or debunked, so leave it in the comments and we will try to do that video. So I'll see you on the next video, which will be the respiratory system side of things.